When Devilman was released in the 1970s, it made waves of moral panic and outcry from outraged parents. But kids ate up the dark and mature story of the original manga. Its creator, Go Nagai, pushed boundaries farther than they had ever been pushed before, and created an all-time classic. But of course, as years went on, Devilman became more of a relic of a bygone era of heroes. While there were 2 OVA adaptations in the late 80s and early 90s, it wouldn't be until the year 2000 that we would see a push by Dynamic Pro to launch Devilman back into the spotlight, this time with a focus on his darker half, AMON, the demon that fused with Akira Fudo to make Devilman. But this new millennium was a very different time than 1972. While the original manga had pushed boundaries, it was now pitted against a decade of edgy and violent anime that, ironically, it had originally inspired. My name is Duncan Shea, and join me as we go on a journey beyond the end of Devilman and into its apocalypse. In April of 1999, Devilman returned to print with a new manga. AMON, the Apocalypse of Devilman, also translated sometimes as AMON, the Dark Side of Devilman, was written and drawn by Yu Kinutani, and is set at the very end of the manga, but not after the end of the manga. Basically, to give you the premise, I unfortunately have to spoil key moments in Devilman. Or at least the ending of Devilman. You see, the story is that Miki's death in the original manga drove Akira into such a rage that he finally let his devil side take over. AMON assumed control over his body. The manga picks up without really recapping the events that led Miki and her family to their tragic end. Instead, it just shows their corpses and a newly edgy leather-clad Akira. Now, this is an interesting premise. After all, how much influence AMON has had over Akira has been subject to change based on the adaptation. In the 1970s anime, AMON was in complete control, possessing a deceased Akira. The manga makes it more clear that Akira is in control, but his personality is greatly influenced by AMON. This seems to be the route that most adaptations line up with, but seeing the manga actually expand on this idea is pretty refreshing. The story begins with AMON wandering the apocalypse in Akira's body, leaving a pile of melting goo humans in his wake. Once the Devilman army realizes that something is up with Akira, they quickly plan to bring him back, even if they're ultimately unsuccessful. The only person that is able to revive him is, of course, Ryo Asuka, who some of you might know better as Lord Satan. This is all the plot to the first volume, and I'm sort of glossing over how much of the latter half is just sick-ass demon fights. And being a spin-off manga, side characters from the original, like Miko or Dosoroku and his gang, are allowed to be fleshed out more. We also get to see AMON separate from Akira, and it might actually surprise some people that AMON absolutely hates Satan. These are things that the original manga just never touched on. Not to mention that the art is gorgeous. Kinutani is an extremely talented artist, and that alone makes the AMON manga worth reading, even if it is a spin-off. By the end of the first volume, Akira is restored and everything seems to be set up for the actual finale of Devilman to take place, making the AMON manga into an interesting diversion, but not anything essential. In fact, it feels right at home with my edgy manga series, essentially becoming a demonic Fist of the North Star by the end of its first arc. The first volume would be collected in the year 2000, and even opens with advertisements for the PlayStation video game and OVA that would release that same year. The world was now primed for Devilman's rebirth into the new millennium. In May of 2000, months after the manga's first collected volume, AMON, the Apocalypse of Devilman was released to the small screen as an original video animation. And I'm going to assume that we know what an OVA is and move on. The position of Amon's story taking place at the end of the manga makes many viewers assume that it is a continuation of the previous two OVAs. But the truth is that AMON is meant to be completely separate from those two, being handled by a completely different team. Unlike the first two OVAs, AMON was made by Studio Live. And if you haven't heard of them, that's totally understandable. Before AMON, their other notable work included Guyver. But no, not that Guyver, but the original Guyver film that was much less well received. And while some sources say that the OVA adapts the AMON manga, I'm going to disagree. Having actually read the manga, I think it's clear that they were made with the same premise in mind, but go off in wildly different directions. The OVA starts by recapping, in depth, the final moments of the Makimura family, and even Akira witnessing Miki's death. Now this was a big moment in the original Devilman, but I kinda have a few problems with it here. It was a big moment for the end of Devilman. Starting your OVA with this moment just kinda makes it start with a huge downer. That being said, I think a lot of people can excuse this, either because they watched the prior two OVAs, or because they're just familiar with Devilman. But taken on its own, it's really just kind of stripping the original story of the impact that it had built up, and leaves the violence just for shock value. Compare the manga, where Miki is already dead at the start and Akira is already possessed. It takes the OVA about 20 whole minutes for AMON to show up, and everything before that is really just dwelling on the lowest point in Devilman, arguably turning what is an impactful and important moment in the manga into misery porn for the OVA. But I have to be honest, once AMON arrives on the scene, things actually start to look up.
あれはまさか。あれはデーモン族最強の勇者アモン。
Before I made this video, I looked back at AMON pretty fondly, and I think this part of the OVA is why. Seeing a buff, cool-looking Devilman slaughtering other freaky, cool-looking demons is actually pretty fun. It's kind of like the first Broly movie, where AMON is just this big, unstoppable punching machine. The action is stylish, and the animation is pretty good, though I don't think it's a particularly good example of what OVAs were capable of in the late 90s. Another thing that I really like about the AMON OVA is that everyone gets an edgy new updated look by Yasushi Nirasawa. They're by far my favorite thing about it. Nirasawa actually had a lot of history with Devilman before the AMON OVA. In fact, he had already had a crack at redesigning Devilman characters all the way back in 1991 for Garage Kits. For AMON, Nirasawa made a lot of sleek new redesigns. Taking after his original leather-clad Garage Kit design, Devilman's hair becomes more hard and solid. The entire look is designed to make him look more angular and agile. The manga's flesh color and the anime's blue skin meet in the middle to form this nice pale purple that I'm actually a really big fan of. And it's easy to see that the title character AMON was designed in the reverse, bulking up the Devilman frame, making his skin bright red to contrast Akira's new cool colors, and making him more hairy and bestial. Nirasawa also designed new demons for AMON to mow through, and honestly, they're the highlight of the film. I'm a sucker for crazy demon designs, and these all hit a sweet spot between cartoony and intimidating. Of course, to tie in with the OVA, Nirasawa's designs were made into a line of figures. And from my experience, some of these figures are easier to get a hold of than others. But usually you can find them in secondhand stores here in Japan. Just the ones that you can find are the ones that no one wants. Nirasawa is a legendary artist, so if you want to get a better idea of his stuff, I urge you to pause this video and read Renzo Addler's article about him. Renzo was also nice enough to give me all of this information about Nirasawa's work on AMON, so you should all go follow him on Twitter as a thank you. The climax of the film is a fistfight between Devilman and AMON. And this is actually a moment I wish we could have seen in the manga. Seeing Akira's inner struggle externalized actually gives it a lot more weight than just seeing it kind of fixed by Ryo. Not to mention, they're fighting to pure butt rock music. But I do think that AMON is lacking as an antagonist. We don't really know anything about him other than that he's big, red, and really mad at Satan. AMON doesn't really inform us about Akira's character. He is a physical reflection of Devilman, but he's not really a reflection of things that Akira struggled with in the manga. He's just sort of a big, dumb, edgy red Devilman. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love Broly too. But the OVA is too moody and too brooding for a villain like this. It lingers on the violence in every shot, and it ends on such an early 2000 grunge song that I can't help but laugh. For what is a shockingly edgy and violent OVA, AMON takes itself too seriously to be much fun, if I'm being honest. And if his story ended there, then maybe I wouldn't have made this video. But it doesn't. Yu Kinutani's manga actually continued into 5 more volumes, and diverged completely from its OVA counterpart. The second volume of the AMON manga is not a direct continuation of the first. Instead, it jumps back millions of years into the prehistoric times that we saw at the start of the original Devilman. The story is now about an ancient AMON and Selene, as Satan rises to power. And right away, you might think that this is a wild turn for this story to take. And it is. The AMON that we follow isn't even the first AMON. It's only after he inherits an ancient evil devil power that he begins to look like our familiar Devilman. Selene is also retconned to be an albino offshoot of a tribe of female bird demons. And at face value, this all sounds a little dumb, and totally just ruins the original Devilman. However, I think that if you give the rest of this manga a chance, there's actually a lot more to like. The demonic and prehistoric setting is really unlike any other manga, and it actually does flesh out characters like Selene and Kaim. And retroactively, it gives AMON more of a motivation, one that he sorely lacked in the first volume and OVA. It's got dinosaurs, demons, blood, guts. It's like something straight out of heavy metal. Now just be warned that since this is prehistory and a good deal of these characters are female bird demons, most pages have at least one nipple prominently displayed. Usually this isn't a problem for me, but I also do have to mention that these nipples are cartoonishly big on both the men and the women. But if you can get past that, there's some fantastic art in this part of the AMON manga. I feel like Volume 2 and 3 are a good addition to the Devilman mythos. Volume 4 still takes place in prehistory, but they introduce a new, vaguely metrosexual villain, and I have to say that this is where the story starts to feel like it's just spinning its wheels. But also, it's unavoidable. When making something that is filling in the gaps and moments between another story, you can't really use the main villain of that original story. So I can forgive Kinutani for making an addition like this just to get the plot moving. What I can forgive less is volumes 5 and 6. Maybe at this point Kinutani was feeling burnt out, because for no discernible reason we go all the way back to present day, but just before the events of the first volume of the AMON manga. Meaning that AMON, the interquel/prequel manga to Devilman, becomes an interquel/prequel manga to itself by the end of it. And once again in these 2 volumes, we're introduced to a vaguely metrosexual villain, and at this point, my patience is wearing thin. Also, the art takes a bit of a downgrade here. Demons are still looking cool and there's still some great action sequences, but women here are thicker and rounder. And hey, maybe that's what you're into. But it's to such a degree that you could honestly tell me that this is Robert Crumb's Devilman, and I wouldn't bat an eye. Still, there are interesting things that this section brings up. It's one of the few pieces to actually really question who's in charge of Akira's body, which always felt like a missed opportunity of the original manga. And we do get to see AMON and Akira fight for a bit, but I do still prefer the OVA in this aspect. The manga concludes by recounting Miki's death scene, this time much more appropriately at the climax of the story instead of the beginning. It shows us the moment that AMON takes over Akira, and then it ends. After all, we already know how the story goes in Volume 1. Meaning that it sort of ends on a whimper instead of a bang. However, this would still not be the end of Kinutani's involvement with Devilman. He would follow up this manga with Devilman Apocalypse Strange Days, which is a side story to a side story of Devilman. This is a single volume manga that tells the story of a rock band with 2 Devilman members that sort of parallel Akira and Ryo. And once again, it takes place in the latter parts of the manga, this time completely removed from the action of the original. And honestly, it's kind of neat seeing not Akira and not Ryo fighting alongside each other like a team of buddy superheroes. And with these newer mid-2000s pro tags comes a bit more focus on high school level drama. This contrasts nicely with the expanded focus on the devil hunters and general paranoia going on in the latter part of Devilman. Eventually, though, we do catch up to the main plot, and our 2 lead band members find themselves on opposite sides of the Devilman War. And then just sort of ends, which seems to be a sort of running theme with Kinutani at this point. But being 1 volume long, there's really only so much you can do. Strange Days feels like more of a tangent than a supplement to Devilman. Whereas AMON was filling in the blanks, Strange Days is just kind of grafted onto Devilman. Still, it's a neat side path to check out if you like Devilman or the AMON manga. And if you want more of Kinutani's art or his demon designs, it's good for that too. If AMON was grunge, then Strange Days is alternative rock, which feels all too appropriate with the chapters being named after different famous rock songs. Devilman's AMON saga is a strange little alleyway in the mythos. It was destined to live in the shadow of the original, but that was almost by design. The OVA will forever be the awkward child that isn't quite a part 3, but also not enough of its own thing to stand apart. The manga, on the other hand, seems perfectly content to fill in every single gap, crack, and crevice left by the original. If you go in looking for a standalone story, you'll be sorely disappointed. But if you look at AMON as an addition, as it was meant to be, then you'll find yourself face to face with the dark side of Devilman.